Welcome to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. The Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. Bringing you the latest from the world of daily fantasy sports and gambling, so you can stop Googling how to join a squid game to cover all those parlays you thought were such a sure thing. Now, sit back and listen to one of the sharpest minds in the game. Here's your host, Dwayne Callender.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. Let's get into the NCAA bracket for the South region. We talked about the West, and again, it's one of those situations where I think the West is weak, but you have some opportunity for double-digit seeds to make a run. The South region, not nearly as appealing in my opinion. Mainly because in terms of double-digit options, you're looking at a couple of schools where I could see for a first-round movement. And the funny thing is, like, the biggest upset isn't really even an upset because it's you've got essentially a Michigan team that probably should have at best been in the play-in game, not an outright seed in the 11th spot, not having to play a game, being favored by 2 points over Colorado State, who's a 6th seed. Technically, that is the upset for the region. Even though it's a 6-11 matchup, so you would normally pick Colorado State in a normal format, folks are going to be leaning towards picking Michigan. And it's because of the line being Michigan favored, and depending on the scoring format of your bracket pool, the Michigan play makes sense. The problem with Michigan is the fact that how they ended the year, and the fact that they weren't all that like a great of a play throughout the season. It's hard to get excited about a play where they've lost a ton of games. Yes, they played a hard schedule, but they lost the bulk of those games to say, yeah, they're going to turn it on when they haven't shown the consistency to turn it on. So if we're going back through Colorado State, they are 34th in the rankings if you're going by Ken Palm. You got Michigan being 32nd. It's essentially the coin flip. It's like, yes, Michigan is favored by a couple of metrics, namely the fact that their strength of schedule favors them. And that's really it. Like, if you're looking at the crux of it, from an efficiency standpoint on offense, they're about even. Defensively, they're about even. And tempo-wise, Michigan is slightly better, but it's not a ton. This really comes down to the fact that the Big Ten is just strength of schedule-wise, opponent-wise. Michigan's number one. That's how they got into the tournament, is how strong their strength of schedule was versus some of their peers. And, while Colorado State did well in the Missouri Mountain West Conference, it's the Mountain West. But realistically, if you're looking at them statistically on paper, this is a pretty even matchup where, again, data models are kind of split on this one. I've seen models where they're kind of going in favor of Michigan. And I've also seen where Colorado State is getting a benefit over Michigan. But the bulk of what I've seen, though, is Michigan's being favored on it. So it's close enough where, again, depending on your scoring format, I would say you take Michigan from the standpoint of, even though the public is going to be on Michigan. Let me be clear. Public's going to be on Michigan. So, regardless of, if, ands, or buts, the public is going to be on Michigan because it's Colorado State versus Michigan. Michigan's the more well-known name. In general, folks are going to gravitate towards the picks and the schools that they know have a history in the tournament. It's going to lean more towards the public picking Michigan. So, depending on how you want to play this to your advantage, you can go closer to picking Colorado State if you're trying to get different. And again, this depends on how you want to approach your betting pool, because if you've got a small pool, it doesn't really make a ton of sense. Even if you're not getting the seed value with Michigan, it doesn't make a ton of sense trying to force things in with Colorado State, because you've got enough people that are going to pass you with Michigan if you go against them in a smaller pool, if you get what I'm saying. In a larger pool, yes, you can have a little bit more leeway with playing Colorado State, get different. If you're doing it in a smaller pool, you're increasing your risk of getting boxed in by calling for an upset too early on a pick where, yeah, can they do it? Certainly. But it's not as though you're backing a horse where it's like they've gotten an inside track on being able to take out Michigan. Like, if I'm looking at this game, just the truth be told, it kind of comes down to just seeing if David Roddick can go off and carry this team, because it's not as though it's an explosive offense. That's just not what they really do. These teams are going to play in the low 70s, and that's it. It's like Colorado State didn't even play a team in the top 25. Michigan was 2-7 against the top 25. So let me be clear. It's not as though Michigan's a world beater. It's just the fact that they played a lot of tough programs. And Colorado State, this is their chance to show what they can do on a national stage, but it's not as though Michigan has shown up a ton. It's kind of hard to see if Hunter Dickinson has anything in this tournament to show, because I think it kind of comes down to him, how Michigan goes, to be perfectly honest with you. It's just the fact that, as a center, he's not exactly that dominant in the paint. So I kind of look at it as like it's kind of coming down to the front court where Roddy's going to be trying to get points in the paint and get some dirty looking buckets, and then Hunter Dickinson, he's got an established presence and kind of get it done. But I look at this matchup for the region because I think it's going to tell us a lot as to how it goes down. If Michigan figures it out, maybe you can do something with them. But truth be told, as I look through this region, Ohio State has been getting knocked out, and last year obviously was no exception. They got knocked out early again. They had 1 year canceled by the pandemic, of course, but they've been getting knocked out of the tournament early and not making it to the second weekend. Loyola Chicago, again, 7-10 matchup, but Loyola Chicago is pretty much going to be playing at a slower pace, but efficient on offense. And what I keep saying with some of these Big Ten schools, yes, they play at a slower pace and they are efficient on offense, but they are susceptible to teams that are stroking it from beyond the arc. And I kind of look at this same, Ohio State's in the same boat as Michigan. If they they get behind because teams are stroking it from three, and we'll talk about Illinois Chattanooga too, because that might be the only one where I'm not as gung ho on what some of the data models are saying, but Loyola Chicago can upset Ohio State. That's not really a shocker to me. The question becomes, what is the intrinsic value of calling for that upset versus missing out on it? So if we look through the numbers of the potential upsets, Ohio State realistically is looking more along the lines of 50, just under. It's like Loyola Chicago is about just over 50% chance of winning that game. Now, if we look at the spread, that game is a pick'em. So, again, when we talk about the pool, the pools that you're in, you start having to kind of try to find value, and I look at it saying, folks want to pick some of these double seeded upsets. Michigan, I can justify the case for. I get why. It's just that Michigan has been so lackluster down the stretch. Wouldn't it surprise me if Michigan bowed out and not in a good way either? I could see Michigan losing quite a bit in terms of that Colorado State matchup if things go badly early and then throwing in the towel. But I get the play because on paper, Michigan matches up well, and you would think that this would be a wake-up call now that they're in the tournament. So it's certainly possible they play up to their potential. Ohio State versus Loyola, that looks like a pick'em in every sense of the word, but it's a 7-10 matchup. Opportunity value is you're looking at Loyola Chicago as a double-digit seed that can pull off an upset that, again, statistically, as you're looking at it, it's not that crazy of a pick. But in terms of the public perception of where it seems though brackets are being set up, just a hair over 50% of the public is backing Ohio State. So again, you got a pick-up matchup. You got a double-digit seed in Loyola Chicago. That's one where you can start taking advantage. And again, it's a small one, but again, you try to find the edge where you can, where you think you have a pretty good shot of Loyola Chicago in a pick-up matchup going over Ohio State, depending on your pool. But I'd even suggest, even if you're not getting the seed value, you might want to consider this one, because in this region, there's not a whole ton to get excited about in terms of upsets. I know people want to call for upsets of certain teams, but I think this bracket plays out pretty much to form. The play, in my opinion, the play kind of comes down to, I think Houston's better than Illinois. So, again, even if you pick the Chattanooga upset, I think Houston beats these teams to go into the second week. And yes, you can pick Houston over Arizona. The problem is that Houston, if we look at a potential matchup against Houston, Arizona, and just kind of run numbers against how that potential upset would look, Arizona would be expected to beat Houston about just under 60% of the time, so about like 58.5% of the time. And, that's not that bad, truth be told. If you're trying to take out a number one seed, you almost would take those odds just because of the potential leverage you can get across the field. The problem is that if Houston doesn't take out Arizona, I think it just kind of comes down to, I believe Tennessee's better than Villanova. A Tennessee-Houston matchup or a Tennessee-Arizona matchup is pretty by the numbers from what we're at least seeing from the initial public data on picks of who's going to win certain matchups. I think it's a case where, if you truly love Villanova, and I don't, so I'm just being perfectly honest. If you truly love Villanova and you want to be different, then you want to be different than teams expected, then you can go with Nova as a pick. The caveat I will say to this, though, I've seen where some of the numbers have been going. Nova and Tennessee are very close to one another of a public pick to make the Final Four. Nova's around 19%. Tennessee's just under 19. They're like 18.8 in terms of percentage odds. Arizona is still expected on over 45% of brackets to make it to the Final Four. It's not that much else there. So that's what makes the Houston pick a little bit different, because Houston, as a Final Four pick, model wise, they come out to about 12%, and again, that's lower than what you would get with Tennessee or Villanova in that same region. Granted, but in a larger pool, where you're trying to get different from thousands and thousands of entries, or even if you're talking about 200, 300 entries, that's enough where, okay, you can start considering teams like Houston to get different. I think when you're getting under 100 entries, you don't actually have to reinvent the wheel in every single region. You can go more chalk by the numbers, the smaller your pool gets. So in this region, I'm only really looking at the 4 teams. I don't like anyone else in this region winning, going to the Final Four. I don't see it with Ohio State. I don't see it with Loyola Chicago. I don't see it with Michigan. There are just not a lot of options in the South region beyond those 4 that I would legitimately feel comfortable saying. So, in my opinion, it depends on how you want to play a potential Arizona-Houston matchup. It depends on how you view Tennessee versus Villanova. Overall, if we're going by the statistical measures, I believe that Tennessee got hosed on the selection. I think they're far more deserving of a 2 seed than Nova is, and that's not to say that I don't think Nova can win, because Nova is still a top 15 team by any statistical measure. It's just that Tennessee, realistically, is a top 10 team by statistical measure. It's like there's not that much separation between Arizona and Tennessee, in my opinion, when you look at it and you start factoring in Tennessee's defense. That not only are they a good defensive squad, they can also score. It's why I don't necessarily dock them the same way I would dock Texas Tech, because Tennessee plays at a faster clip, better rebounding team. Defensively, they're good as well. So they're able to generate offense in scrappy ways. So I'm not as worried about them as some other clubs that play at a slower tempo do. So again, it's not a knock on Villanova, because I think Villanova most certainly can make it to the Final Four. I'm just saying that in terms of the 4 teams in this region, I have them the least likely to make it. But statistically, models like Villanova more than Houston. So it really comes down to how you want to play it in terms of the numbers and how many brackets you're working out. But, as you kind of look through this region, this one probably is going to be the most by the numbers amongst what you'll see in terms of matchup. So in a Sweet 16, I'm looking at Arizona, Houston, Tennessee, and Villanova. And yes, that's pretty boring, but that's kind of the way it is. I don't necessarily see anything interesting with Illinois to try to roll the dice there, in my opinion. So, again, you have to take this with the information you're getting. Illinois, again, they've got good numbers stats-wise, but a lot of these numbers, especially in KenPom, they get adjusted by the strength of schedule. So the Big Ten has this thing where everyone's being bumped up because of their strength of schedule, but if you're looking at the individual offensive and defensive stats, I'm not as enamored with Illinois as some of these teams because Illinois, they are a well-rounded squad. Nothing truly stand out about what they're doing offensively, but they're solid. And so it's just one of those situations where, it depends on how well-rounded you are as a group in terms of getting by. But I look at those four as the best case scenario. Yeah, maybe you can dabble with Illinois, but, again, you don't want to spread yourself too thin with your bracket selections unless you're playing a ton and trying to get different. But I'm just, for my evaluation, I think, I'm pretty set on going Houston over Illinois. I just, from my vantage point, I think you've got a stronger squad in Houston. You've got a top 4 team in Houston, potentially, in terms of offense and defense. They do it all in terms of what they're able to bring to the table. They just happen to play in the American, and when you play in the American, you get knocked down in terms of strength of schedule. So again, that also ends up impacting your ranking. And I feel as though Houston got the shaft because they play in the American and not in one of the actual major conferences. And so they got stuck with this 5 seed. But I think Houston is just a flat out, I think they're the second best team in the region. And you get added value by taking that and saying maybe they can pull off the upset against Arizona. I think the most likely team to upset Arizona is Houston. So, it is what it is. I just look at it from the standpoint of you're trying to get different, but it's not the worst thing in the world if it doesn't pan out. It's just one of those where you always have another bracket where Arizona gets through past Houston. But I would say the most likely scenario is if Houston can't get the job done in the South region, Arizona takes it on their own. So that is where I'll leave things off for the South region in terms of the breakdown. But, best of luck to everyone. We'll keep these going as we get through the final 2 regions. But that's all for now, and have a good one, folks.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all other major outlets.